The flash of blue and red lights painted my living room walls like a nightmare. My daughter froze, her cereal spoon suspended midair. Through the window, I could see Sheriff Sheila marching across my front lawn, hand already on her citation book. This was the third time this week. My heart pounded as I stepped onto the porch, watching her boots crush the flowers my wife had planted just yesterday. "Step back inside, sir," she commanded, her voice cold as winter steel. "This is my property," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. Her radio crackled. "Got another one, dispatch. Residential code violation, possible obstruction." She smirked as she wrote, not even looking up. That was when I noticed her cruiser had deliberately parked across my mailbox, blocking delivery. I reached for my phone and started recording. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. She took one step closer. "Recording an officer is obstruction of justice in this county," she whispered, "and nobody will believe you anyway." That was the moment I decided Sheriff Sheila had to go down. The morning had started like any other Sunday in Pinewood County. Birds chirped their gentle melodies as golden sunlight filtered through the oak trees that lined Chestnut Lane. I had risen early, as was my habit, to enjoy the peaceful solitude before the rest of the neighborhood stirred to life. The ceramic mug in my hand warmed my palms as steam from fresh coffee curled into the crisp morning air. These quiet moments were sacred to me. My truck sat in the driveway, still dripping from its weekly wash. The black paint gleamed under the morning sun, reflecting clouds that drifted lazily overhead. I had owned that Ford F-150 for nearly 7 years now. It was not the newest model, but I maintained it meticulously, treating it with the same care I applied to everything in my life. After 15 years at Harmon Manufacturing, I had finally received the promotion to Senior Operations Manager. The salary increase meant we could finally renovate the kitchen, perhaps even start saving for a vacation to the coast. My wife, Alina, had been talking about seeing the ocean again for years. Our daughter, Lily, had never seen it at all. At 12 years old, her world consisted of this small town and not much beyond it. Mrs. Patterson waved from across the street as she collected her newspaper. I raised my coffee mug in greeting. From 2 houses down, Robert gave me a thumbs up as he loaded fishing gear into his station wagon. This was Pinewood County, small, friendly, where everyone knew your name but respected your space. I had lived here all my life, as had my father before me. Finishing my coffee, I placed the mug on the porch railing and walked toward my truck. The application for the building permit was inside, completed and ready to submit tomorrow. One step closer to the renovation. One step closer to fulfilling a promise to Alina. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against my back despite the warming day. Turning the key, the engine purred to life with a reassuring rumble. I carefully backed down the driveway, checking both mirrors despite knowing the street would be empty at this hour. That was when I heard it, the sudden screech of tires against asphalt. A white patrol car with Sheriff's Department emblazoned on its side cut across my field of vision, tires biting into the edge of my lawn as it came to an abrupt stop behind my truck. The driver's door swung open before the vehicle had fully settled. Sheriff Sheila Hodges emerged with deliberate slowness, adjusting her belt and straightening her campaign hat with practiced precision. She was not particularly tall, but her presence expanded to fill any space she occupied. Dark sunglasses concealed her eyes, but her thin-lipped expression communicated everything necessary. "License and registration." Her voice carried the flatness of routine, yet somehow managed to convey accusation in every syllable. I blinked, confused. "Pardon me, Sheriff. You were operating that vehicle at excessive speed in a residential zone. License and registration, please." She held out her hand, unwavering. My mind struggled to process her words. "Sheriff Hodges, I was backing out of my driveway. I could not have been going more than 5 miles per hour." She removed her sunglasses, revealing cold eyes that assessed me with clinical detachment. "Are you refusing to comply with a lawful order, Mr. Mitchell?" "No, I am just confused. This is my private driveway. How could I possibly be speeding here?" Sheriff Sheila's expression hardened further. "The driveway connects to a public road. The transition zone is under county jurisdiction. Your speedometer registered 12 miles per hour in a 10-mile-per-hour transition zone. The absurdity of her claim left me momentarily speechless. There was no posted speed limit on my driveway. There was no such thing as a transition zone in our county code, at least none that I had ever heard of during my decades living here. Sheriff, that cannot be right. There is no posted limit here, and I was barely moving. She pulled out her citation book, flipping it open with practiced efficiency. Arguing with an officer constitutes interference with official duties. Would you like me to add that to the citation? My neighbors had stopped their morning activities to watch the scene unfold. Mrs. Patterson hovered uncertainly near her mailbox. Robert stood frozen beside his car, fishing poles forgotten in his hands. The weight of their stares pressed against my back as Sheriff Sheila wrote the ticket with deliberate strokes of her pen. "Sign here," she said, thrusting the paper toward me. "This is not an admission of guilt, merely an acknowledgement of receipt." I signed, my hand shaking slightly with suppressed anger. She tore off my copy and handed it to me without meeting my eyes. "Have a compliant day, Mr. Mitchell," she said, turning on her heel. As I watched her patrol car pull away, something shifted inside me. The morning sun continued to shine with the same intensity, but the warmth had gone. In its place, a cold certainty settled in my chest. Something was deeply wrong in Pinewood County, and somehow I had become its newest target. The citation resting on my kitchen table seemed surreal under the fluorescent lights. "Reckless operation on residential pavement," it read. The fine amounted to $375, with court costs potentially adding another $100. Below that, in Sheriff Sheila's rigid handwriting, was a court date scheduled for 3 weeks from today. Elena stood behind me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "This cannot be legal, David. She cannot just make up violations." "Apparently she can," I replied, the paper trembling slightly in my grip. "At least until someone challenges her." The next morning, I arrived at the sheriff's department, citation in hand and rationality firmly in place. The station was a squat brick building with American flags flanking the entrance, presenting an image of orderly justice that felt increasingly hollow. The receptionist, a young woman with darting eyes who introduced herself as Jenny, seemed nervous when I requested to speak with Sheriff Hodges. She picked up her phone, whispering into it while glancing at me repeatedly. 10 minutes later, Sheriff Sheila appeared through a side door, her uniform crisp and immaculate. Without invitation, I explained my position. There was no posted speed limit on my driveway, no legal basis for the citation, and I wished to have it dismissed. She listened without expression, arms crossed over her chest. When I finished, she merely smiled, a technical movement of facial muscles that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, your ignorance of County Ordinance 37.4 does not constitute a defense. The citation stands." She uncrossed her arms. "Anything else?" "I would like to see this ordinance," I said, maintaining eye contact despite the intimidating stillness of her gaze. "County Records Office, 3rd floor. Public hours are Tuesday and Thursday, 9 to 11. She turned to leave, then paused. "I understand congratulations are in order. Senior Operations Manager is quite a responsibility. I imagine Harmon Manufacturing relies heavily on county permits for their expansion projects." The implication hung in the air between us. She had researched me since yesterday. She knew my employer, my promotion, and was subtly reminding me of the power she wielded. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff," I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. Walking back to my car, I noticed how people averted their eyes as I passed. Mrs. Thompson, who had brought us a casserole when Alina had surgery last year, crossed to the opposite sidewalk rather than greet me. Tom Wilson, whose son played baseball with Lily, suddenly became fascinated with his phone when he saw me approaching. It was as if I had developed some contagious disease overnight. One called Sheriff Sheila's attention. At the county records office that Thursday, I discovered Ordinance 37.4 did not address residential driveways at all. It concerned commercial loading zones in the downtown district. When I pointed this out to the clerk, She stammered something about possible amendments and hurried away, never returning to the counter. That evening, I filed a formal complaint with the county administrator's office. The secretary accepted my paperwork with a sympathetic smile that seemed genuine enough. "I will make sure this reaches the right people," she promised. 3 days later, I received a form letter stating my complaint had been reviewed and closed without action due to insufficient substantiation of claims. The signature at the bottom was not the county administrator's, but rather that of Deputy Sheriff Marcus Evans, Sheriff Sheila's second-in-command. It was at the grocery store that weekend that I first heard the whispers. I was selecting apples when Bill Grayson, a retired schoolteacher, approached me cautiously. "David," he said, voice low despite the empty aisle, "you are not the first. The Hendersons had similar troubles last year after their fence dispute with Sheriff Hodges' brother-in-law. They sold their place and moved to Arizona by Christmas." Before I could respond, he patted my shoulder and walked away, leaving me holding a red delicious that suddenly felt heavy as stone. At home, I began researching. County records showed a pattern: complaints filed against Sheriff Sheila that disappeared without resolution. Property transfers following minor citations that escalated into legal nightmares. Deputies who resigned abruptly, moving far from Pinewood County without explanation. Elena found me at midnight, surrounded by printouts and notes. "Come to bed," she pleaded. "This is not worth making yourself sick over." "It is not about the ticket anymore," I told her, showing her the patterns I had identified. "She has been doing this for years, targeting people, making their lives miserable until they break or leave." "But why us? What did we do?" I had no answer then. Perhaps our property was desired by someone in her circle. Perhaps my promotion had attracted unwanted attention. Or perhaps we were simply convenient examples to reinforce her control over the community. What I did know was that backing down would only embolden her. Sheriff Sheila had made a critical error in choosing me as her target. Unlike others before me, I had nothing to hide, nothing to lose, and a stubbornness that my father had often called my worst quality. But sometimes, stubbornness was exactly what justice required. Morning sunlight no longer brought peace. Instead, it illuminated the white sheriff's cruiser that rolled past our house with clockwork regularity. Every hour, sometimes more frequently, deputies would drive by, slowing conspicuously as they passed our driveway. They never stopped, never spoke, just watched, documented, and continued their patrol. Elena noticed it first. "That is the third time Deputy Evans has circled the block," she whispered one Tuesday morning, peering through the curtains. "What are they looking for?" "They are not looking for anything," I replied, placing my hand on her shoulder. "They are making sure we see them." Our daughter Lily had begun asking to be driven to school rather than walking the 4 blocks as she had done since 4th grade. "The deputies stare at me," she explained, eyes downcast as she twisted the straps of her backpack. "The other kids are asking questions. They think I did something wrong." The isolation grew. Dinner invitations ceased. Church members who had once greeted us warmly now offered only tight smiles before finding reasons to be elsewhere. Even my boss at Harmon Manufacturing had called me into his office to ask, with studied casualness, if everything was stable at home. The second citation arrived predictably, precisely 14 days after the first. I had pulled into our driveway with groceries, parking partially across the sidewalk while I unloaded the heavy bags. I had made 3 trips from car to house when Sheriff Sheila's cruiser appeared as if materialized from thin air. "Obstruction of public right-of-way," she announced without preamble, already writing the ticket. $500 civil penalty. "I am unloading groceries," I stated, placing a bag on the ground. "This will take 2 more minutes at most." She continued writing without looking up. "Your vehicle is obstructing pedestrian passage on a county-maintained sidewalk. The violation is not time-dependent." An elderly couple walking their dog crossed the street rather than pass near our confrontation. I recognized them as the Wilsons, residents for over 40 years. They had attended our housewarming party when we first moved in. Now they averted their eyes as if witnessing something shameful. "Sign here," Sheriff Sheila said, extending the citation book. I signed silently, then watched her return to her vehicle. Before leaving, she paused and surveyed our property with deliberate attention, making notes in a small black book separate from her official paperwork. That night, I installed doorbell cameras, front door, back door, and one with a view of the driveway. The system linked to my phone, recording continuously with motion alerts. Elena questioned the expense. Money was growing tighter with the unexpected fines, but security had become more valuable than luxury. "We need evidence," I explained while mounting the final camera. "Whatever happens next, we need proof." What happened next arrived 3 days later. A plain white envelope appeared on our porch sometime before dawn, no postmark, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 6 typed words: "Move out while you can. Seriously." Elena's hands shook as she read it. "David, they are threatening us now. We should talk to a lawyer." I nodded, photographing the note and envelope before placing them in a sealed plastic bag. "Yes, but not a local one. Someone from the city who has no connections here." Reviewing the camera footage revealed nothing. Whoever delivered the note had carefully avoided the camera's field of vision. This was not an impulsive act, but something calculated and planned. Sheriff Sheila's cruiser made its scheduled pass 30 minutes later. She slowed to a near stop in front of our house, making direct eye contact with me through the window before accelerating away. The message was clear: "I am watching you. Always." That afternoon, I followed Deputy Evans during his patrol route. At precisely 2-hour intervals, he passed our house, recorded something in his logbook, and continued his circuit. I tracked him through 6 complete cycles, noting that our street was the only residential area he surveilled with such dedication. The rest of his time was spent near the highway or commercial district. At the supermarket, the whispers continued. Martha from the bakery slipped me a napkin with a phone number while bagging my bread. "For your own good," she murmured. "Call from a payphone, not your cell." The number belonged to Thomas Garner, a deputy who had resigned 8 months earlier. We met at a diner 20 miles outside county lines. Thomas was a young man with old eyes, constantly checking the entrance as we spoke. "She builds cases," he explained between sips of coffee that never reached his lips. "Creates paper trails, minor violations that escalate until she has enough to take whatever she wants: your property, your reputation, your freedom." "But why?" I asked. "What does she gain?" Thomas stared into his untouched coffee. "Control, power, for some people that is enough." He paused, glancing again toward the door. "Check property transfers following citations. Check who buys the land after people leave. Always the same names, always the same pattern." As I drove home that evening, a revelation struck with terrible clarity. This was not random harassment. I was being stalked, systematically, legally, and with the full authority of the county behind it. My phone pinged with a motion alert from our driveway camera. Deputy Evans was parked across the street, photographing our house in the fading light. I did not wave. I did not acknowledge him. Instead, I adjusted my own camera angle to better capture his surveillance. 2 could play at this documentation game, and I intended to win. The county records building stood 3 stories tall, a monument of bureaucracy constructed in the 1970s when optimism about government transparency still existed. I entered through the main doors precisely at 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, notebook in hand and determination in my heart. The clerk recognized me from my previous visits. Her smile faltered as I approached. "Mr. Mitchell, how may I assist you today?" "Property transfer records for the past 5 years, please. Specifically, properties sold following legal disputes or code violations." Her fingers hovered uncertainly over her keyboard. "That is quite a broad request. Perhaps you could narrow the parameters." "I could," I replied evenly. "Or I could submit a formal Freedom of Information Act request, which would require complete compliance within 10 business days." 15 minutes later, I sat surrounded by file boxes in a small research room. The pattern emerged quickly once I knew what to look for. Properties cited for violations were often sold within 6 months of receiving multiple citations. The buyers were never individuals, but rather LLCs with obscure names like Pinewood Development Opportunities or Rural Heritage Acquisitions. Tracing these companies through state business registries revealed a network of shell corporations, all leading back to three principal owners: Sheriff Sheila's brother-in-law, the county commissioner's son, and a retired judge who now served as special counsel to the sheriff's department. Properties acquired for pennies on the dollar were later rezoned and resold at substantial profits. A family farm that sold for $175,000 after a barrage of water rights violations was rezoned commercial and resold 18 months later for over $1 million. My phone buzzed with a text from Alina. Deputy parked outside again, taking pictures of the house. I photographed every document, every connection, building my own paper trail. As I worked, footsteps approached from behind. "Finding everything you need." The voice belonged to Thomas Jenkins, the county records administrator. His tone was friendly, but his eyes conveyed warning. "Just conducting some research," I replied, closing the folder in front of me. He nodded slowly. "Research has a way of attracting attention in this building, cameras everywhere." He gestured subtly toward the ceiling corner where a security device blinked steadily. "I appreciate the reminder," I said, understanding his unspoken message. That evening, I called Jacob Reynolds, a retired investigative journalist who had exposed corruption in the State Highway Commission 10 years earlier. His name had appeared in my research as someone who had briefly looked into Pinewood County leadership before abruptly abandoning the investigation. We met at a library 30 miles from Pinewood. Jacob was in his 60s now, gray-haired but with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I wondered when someone would finally connect the dots," he said after examining my findings. "I started this investigation 3 years ago but ran into walls everywhere. Sources disappeared, records vanished. Then my brakes failed on Highway 16. He tapped a cane resting against his chair. "Could have been coincidence. Chose not to test that theory further." "Will you help me now?" I asked. "Not as a journalist, but as an advisor. I need to know how to build this case properly." Jacob studied me for a long moment. "They ruined good people, families who had lived here for generations." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I will help you, but we work smart, not loud. Document everything. Trust no one in the county system." Over the next 2 weeks, we expanded our investigation. Jacob introduced me to Maria Sanchez, who had lost her restaurant to code violations that mysteriously appeared after she refused to sell to Rural Heritage Acquisitions. Robert Finch had surrendered his land when daily citations for improper rural mailbox height escalated to criminal charges of interfering with federal mail delivery. Most disturbing was Walter Coleman's story. The elderly man had lived alone on 20 acres of prime lakefront property. After refusing multiple purchase offers, he began receiving citations for violations ranging from excessive lawn height to improper trash can placement. When he could not pay the mounting fines, Sheriff Sheila herself oversaw his eviction. Walter now lived in a small apartment in the next county, his pride and independence shattered. "They always start small," Walter told us, hands trembling as he showed us his collection of citations. "A ticket here, a warning there, nothing worth fighting about individually. By the time you see the pattern, they have built such a case against you that no one believes your side anymore." Jacob helped me organize our findings into a structured document. Names, dates, violations, property transfers, corporate connections, all meticulously arranged to reveal the systematic abuse of power. "This is not just about tickets anymore," Jacob observed as we reviewed our work. "This is organized corruption on a county level. You realize what happens if you pursue this." I nodded, thinking of Alina and Lily, of our home and the life we had built. "I do, but what happens if nobody ever stands up to this?" Jacob's expression was grim. "Then the queen keeps her kingdom and everyone else pays tribute or leaves." The evidence was irrefutable. Sheriff Sheila was not just an officer drunk on power. She was the enforcer for a sophisticated scheme that had been targeting residents for years, using the law as a weapon to seize property and control lives. As I drove home that night, A patrol car fell in behind me, following at precisely the legal distance. Not threatening, not yet, just reminding me that eyes were always watching. I did not swerve, I did not speed. I drove exactly at the limit, stopping completely at every sign. Let them watch. The game was changing, and Sheriff Sheila had no idea what was coming next. Jacob's blog post went live at exactly midnight. The Queen of Our Street: How Law Enforcement Became a Weapon in Pinewood County. The article laid out the pattern with clinical precision. Minor citations leading to financial ruin, property transfers to shell companies, rezoning applications mysteriously approved, and enormous profits flowing to the same small circle of connected individuals. No direct accusations, just data, documents, and questions that deserved answers. Jacob had been careful to make everything defensible, everything provable. The last paragraph posed a simple question. When those tasked with upholding the law become its most skilled manipulators, who protects the citizens of Pinewood County? By morning, the article had been shared hundreds of times. My phone rang continuously, residents sharing similar stories, local business owners who had witnessed the pattern, even two former deputies offering to speak anonymously about directives they had received. Elena watched the mounting responses with growing concern. What happens now, David? They will not simply apologize and stop. No, I agreed. They will escalate, but now they must do it with people watching. The community reaction split predictably. Those who had suffered under Sheriff Sheila's regime whispered their support, though few dared speak openly. Others, particularly those with connections to county leadership, defended her vigorously, calling the article a baseless attack on law enforcement and questioning my motives. Mrs. Patterson crossed the street for the first time in weeks, pressing a plate of cookies into Elena's hands. "We should have spoken sooner," she murmured. "We were just so afraid." The official response came swiftly. At 9:30 that morning, I received a call from the county administrator's office. Sheriff Sheila had requested a mediation session to resolve community concerns in a productive manner. The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock that afternoon. Jacob advised caution. "This is not mediation, this is damage control, record everything." The county administrative building's conference room felt deliberately intimidating, a long table with the county seal prominently displayed on the wall behind the head chair. Sheriff Sheila sat beside County Commissioner Hargrove and County Attorney Davis. They had positioned themselves on one side, leaving me alone on the other. I placed my phone visibly on the table, the recording app open and running. Sheriff Sheila's eyes flicked to it momentarily. "Mr. Mitchell," Commissioner Hargrove began with a practiced smile, "we appreciate your willingness to discuss these community concerns in a constructive setting." "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied, matching his formal tone. Sheriff Sheila leaned forward, her uniform immaculate as always. "Let me be direct, Mr. Mitchell. The blog post contains serious mischaracterizations that border on defamation. We are prepared to overlook this lapse in judgment if the post is retracted immediately." I maintained eye contact. "Which specific facts in the article do you believe are incorrect? We would be happy to issue corrections for any demonstrable errors." County Attorney Davis cleared his throat. "The implication of coordinated impropriety is itself defamatory, regardless of individual data points." "Implications are drawn by readers not stated in the article," I countered. "The data speaks for itself." Sheriff Sheila's composed facade cracked slightly. "Let me be perfectly clear. Continuing to pursue this investigation could constitute obstruction of ongoing law enforcement operations. That carries serious consequences." "Are you threatening me with criminal charges for researching public records?" "I am informing you of potential legal consequences for interfering with county business," she replied, her voice hardening. "We have tolerated your disruptive behavior thus far, but patience has limits." I nodded slowly, making sure my phone captured every word. "I appreciate your candor, Sheriff. To confirm my understanding, you consider citizen review of public records to be disruptive behavior that warrants potential criminal charges." Commissioner Hargrove intervened quickly. No one is discussing criminal charges at this stage. We simply want to resolve this misunderstanding before positions become entrenched. The meeting continued for 40 minutes, a careful dance of threats veiled as concerns and intimidation disguised as compromise. I committed to nothing, agreed to nothing, simply listened and asked clarifying questions that required them to articulate their positions explicitly. As the meeting concluded, Sheriff Sheila remained behind as the others filed out. "You think you are very clever with your research and your recordings," she said quietly. "But cleverness will not help when I place your daughter's boyfriend's car under scrutiny. Teenagers make so many driving errors, do they not?" The threat to Lily struck like physical pain. "Are you threatening a minor, Sheriff?" Her smile returned, cold and confident. "I am simply reflecting on the statistical likelihood of traffic incidents among young drivers. Have a compliant day, Mr. Mitchell." I walked out, hands shaking but resolve strengthened. The recording was immediately backed up to 3 separate secure locations. Copies were sent to Jacob, to an attorney in the state capitol, and to a secure email account accessible only through a password Alina and I had created together. That evening our street fell eerily quiet. No patrol cars circled. No deputies photographed our house. The absence of surveillance felt more threatening than its presence had been. "They are planning something," Alina whispered as we checked the locks for the 3rd time that night. "Yes," I agreed, "but so are we." The battle lines were drawn. Sheriff Sheila had made her position clear. Now it was time to show her that some citizens would not be intimidated, not anymore. I had tried reasoning. I had tried documenting. I had tried exposing her locally. But Sheriff Sheila was entrenched in a system that protected her, and she knew exactly how to twist the law to her advantage. It was time to fight her with the very thing she had weaponized against me, the law itself. The attorney's office was located in the state capitol, 2 hours from our small town. The marble floors and oak-paneled walls were intimidating, but not nearly as intimidating as living under Sheila's constant surveillance. I carried a thick folder containing every citation, every photograph, every video recording, and every statement I had gathered over the past 3 months. "This is textbook abuse of power," the civil rights attorney said, his expression grave as he flipped through my evidence. "I have seen corruption before, but rarely this blatant, and rarely this well-documented." He looked up at me with newfound respect. "Most people fold under this kind of pressure. They move away, they pay the fines, they surrender." I leaned forward in my chair. "I am not most people." "That is becoming quite clear," he replied. We spent 4 hours organizing the evidence into categories: harassment, intimidation, improper citations, retaliatory actions, pattern of behavior, and witness corroboration. Each section told part of a larger story, the story of a sheriff who had turned public service into personal power. "We need to file a formal request to audit her entire precinct," the attorney explained. "Every citation, every arrest, every complaint, every dismissed case. The scope needs to be comprehensive enough that they cannot just review your situation and call it an isolated incident." I nodded. "How long will that take?" "Filing the request. We can do that tomorrow. Getting a response. That depends on how many friends she has in high places." He was right to be cautious. The next morning, after the audit request was officially submitted, I received a text from my wife that made my blood run cold. "She just gave me a ticket in my office parking lot." I called immediately. My wife's voice was shaking. I was not even in the car. She was waiting when I walked out after my shift. She said my car was parked 6 inches over the line. Richard, she followed me to work. She knew my schedule. That night, I paced our living room, anger building with each step. Sheila had crossed a line by targeting my wife. This was no longer just about me. This was about my family. This was about every family she had intimidated. "We need to go bigger," I told my attorney the next day. "The local channels are too afraid to touch this. We need state attention." He hesitated. "That means going to the ACLU, maybe national press. Are you prepared for what that means? The spotlight will not just be on her, it will be on you too." I thought about my peaceful mornings that now felt like a distant memory. I thought about my neighbors who lived in fear. I thought about my wife's trembling voice. I am prepared, make the calls. Within 48 hours, our case had been reviewed by the regional ACLU office. They agreed to provide additional legal support. 3 media outlets requested interviews. A legal watchdog organization began combing through Sheila's professional history in other counties. The spotlight was growing, and for the first time since that morning in my driveway, I felt something shift. Sheila had always operated in shadows, in the gray areas where her word against yours meant she always won. But now, that darkness was being flooded with light from all directions. When my phone rang at 10:30 p.m., I expected it to be my attorney with an update. Instead, it was Deputy Collins, his voice hushed and nervous. "She is losing it," he whispered. "She called an emergency meeting tonight, ordered us to review every case involving you or anyone connected to you. She wants dirt. She wants something to use." I felt a chill. Is she going to find anything? There was a long pause. No, but that does not mean she will not create something. After we hung up, I called my attorney. We need protection now. 2 days later, a formal cease and desist letter was delivered to the sheriff's department. Copies were sent to the county board, the state police oversight committee, and the district attorney's office. The message was clear. Every move Sheila made was now being watched by people far more powerful than her. The queen of our street was discovering that her kingdom had borders after all, and she had crossed them long ago. It began with whispers, then murmurs, then voices that grew steadily louder. The silence that had protected Sheriff Sheila for years was finally breaking. Mrs. Hendricks was the first to speak publicly. At 72, she had lived on our street longer than anyone. Standing on her porch with a reporter's microphone clipped to her cardigan, she recounted how Sheila had ticketed her 3 times for improper yard maintenance after Mrs. Hendricks had questioned a roadblock placement. "I had to take out a small loan to pay the fines," she said, her voice wavering but determined. "I have lived here since 1978, never had a citation until I crossed her." Within days, others came forward. The Rodriguez family shared security camera footage of Sheila entering their backyard without a warrant. The Thompsons revealed how their teenage son had been detained for 2 hours for suspicious loitering while waiting for the school bus. Each story was a piece of a larger mosaic, a portrait of systematic intimidation by someone sworn to protect and serve. "Enough," Mr. Davis announced at an impromptu neighborhood meeting in his garage. "We have been afraid for too long." 26 residents signed a public letter demanding Sheila's removal from office. The letter was delivered to the county board, the sheriff's department, and every news outlet within 100 miles. It was no longer just my fight. It had become our fight. The following Saturday, over 60 people gathered peacefully outside the sheriff's department. They carried simple signs with powerful messages. Badges are for protection, not oppression. Equal justice under law. Our street, our rights. I stood among them, still somewhat amazed at how quickly the community had mobilized once the first person found the courage to speak. For years, Sheila had survived by isolating her targets. But now, those targets had found each other. Sheriff Sheila arrived at noon, her cruiser cutting through the crowd that parted silently before her. She stepped out, visibly shocked by the number of familiar faces. For a moment, she maintained her composure, walking briskly toward the building entrance. Then someone called her name. She turned, her face flushed. "This is an unauthorized gathering," she shouted. "You are obstructing a public building entrance." "We are on public property," Mrs. Hendricks replied calmly, "exercising our constitutional rights." Something in Sheila snapped. "You people have no idea what I do to keep this town safe. You ungrateful." She launched into a tirade that grew increasingly personal and profane. Every second was captured on dozens of phones. By nightfall, her meltdown had been viewed over 10,000 times. The local news led with the story. Sheriff faces public backlash amid misconduct allegations. 3 days later, the county board called an emergency session. The meeting room was filled beyond capacity. For 4 hours, residents testified about their experiences. Sheila sat stone-faced at the front, her supporters dwindling as the testimony continued. Board member Phillips finally addressed the room after the last speaker. In light of the serious nature of these allegations and the pending state investigation, this board will vote on temporarily freezing Sheriff Sheila Wallace's authority pending the outcome of a full departmental review. The vote was 6-1 in favor. As we filed out of the meeting hall, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Deputy Collins. "You know she blames you for all of this," he said quietly. I nodded, "I know. Be careful, she may have lost her authority, but she still has her anger." That night I stood in my driveway, the very spot where this had all begun. The street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement. In the distance, I could see neighbors gathered on porches, talking in animated groups. Windows that had been perpetually curtained were now open, letting in the evening air. The fear was lifting, slowly but unmistakably, like fog burning away under morning sun. We were reclaiming our street, our homes, our right to exist without intimidation. I took a deep breath and looked up at the stars. The battle was not over, but for the first time, victory seemed possible. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever felt the sting of power abused. The Queen was losing her throne. One testimony, one video, one brave voice at a time. The interim sheriff, a career officer named Thomas Grant, took over the department the following Monday. His first official act was to open all internal files to the state investigators. His second was to invite any officer with information about improper directives to come forward without fear of retaliation. They came in waves. Deputy Collins was first, bringing audio recordings of morning briefings where Sheila had instructed officers to target specific residents. Then came Officer Martinez with documentation of quota systems for citations that focused on certain neighborhoods. The most damning evidence came from the department's own administrative assistant, who produced emails showing Sheila had ordered officers to discard certain complaints without processing them. "This goes beyond poor leadership," Interim Sheriff Grant told the press. "These allegations, if proven true, represent criminal misconduct." Sheila did not surrender quietly. One Tuesday morning, I was served with papers at my workplace. She was suing me for defamation, claiming I had orchestrated a malicious campaign of lies that had damaged her reputation and career. My attorney received the filing with something close to amusement. "This is the best thing she could have done for us," he explained. "Now we get discovery, we get to depose her under oath, we get to subpoena every document she has tried to hide." The defamation case collapsed during the first hearing. Sheila's attorney withdrew from representation after our countersuit presented evidence that she had knowingly filed false reports. The judge dismissed her case with prejudice and referred her conduct to the State Bar Association for review. Meanwhile, the county board's investigation expanded. 3 former deputies from neighboring counties came forward with accounts of similar behavior during Sheila's previous postings. A pattern emerged. She would rise quickly through departments, using aggressive enforcement to impress superiors, then use her authority to settle personal scores. The board votes unanimously to suspend Sheriff Sheila Wallace indefinitely, pending the outcome of criminal investigations, the chairman announced after a closed session. The room erupted in applause. That evening, our street held an impromptu gathering. Someone brought folding tables. Others arrived with covered dishes and desserts. Music played from portable speakers. Children rode bicycles freely up and down the pavement, something that had become rare during Sheila's patrols. "We should mark this somehow," Mrs. Hendricks suggested as we shared a meal under the oak trees. "Something permanent." The idea took hold immediately. Mr. Thompson, who served on the town council, explained the process for renaming a street. "It requires a majority petition from residents and approval from the council. But given the circumstances, I doubt there would be any opposition." 78 signatures were collected that night. The proposed name, Justice Way. 2 weeks later, the council approved the change unanimously. The old street signs came down. New ones went up. The symbolism was lost on no one, especially not the reporters who covered the small ceremony. As the last of the new signs was installed, Councilwoman Perez approached me. "We have an opening on the Community Oversight Board," she said. "It reviews police policies and citizen complaints. Given your experience and the respect you have earned, we would like you to consider the position." I was speechless. 6 months earlier, I had been just another resident washing his truck on Sunday mornings. Now I was being asked to help ensure that what happened to our street never happened again. "I would be honored," I finally replied. That night I sat on my front porch, watching the shadows lengthen across Justice Way. My wife joined me, placing a cup of coffee in my hands. "Did you ever imagine it would go this far?" she asked. I shook my head. I just wanted the harassment to stop. I never expected to change the whole system. "Sometimes standing your ground does more than protect your own space," she said. "Sometimes it creates new space for everyone." I thought about all the people who had found their voices, the neighbors who now waved and called greetings across yards, the children playing freely in the evening light. This was more than victory over one corrupt official. This was community reborn. As darkness fell, lights came on in houses up and down Justice Way. Each window glowed with the simple, profound freedom of people living without fear in their own homes. This was what justice looked like, not just in courtrooms or board meetings, but in the everyday life of an ordinary street where one morning everything had changed. The official letter arrived on a Tuesday, its state seal gleaming under the hallway light. Inside was the formal notification. Sheila Wallace had been permanently stripped of her badge and law enforcement certification by the State Review Board. The 15-page report detailed each violation, each abuse of power, each moment when authority had been wielded as a personal weapon. I read it twice, then set it aside. There was no joy in someone else's downfall, only relief that the harm had ended. 2 days later, the court ruling came down. Judge Eleanor Martin did not mince words. "This court finds substantial and irrefutable evidence of systematic abuse of authority. The respondent used her position not to uphold the law, but to impose personal control through intimidation, selective enforcement, and retaliatory action." The ruling ordered full restitution to every resident who had received improper citations. It mandated a comprehensive review of all arrests made under Sheila's authority, and it permanently barred her from holding any public office in the state. A simple white envelope arrived in my mailbox the following week. Inside was a county check for $783, the exact amount I had paid for the citations, plus interest. There was no note, no explanation. Just restitution, cold and impersonal, like the system itself had finally awakened from a long sleep. "What will you do with it?" my wife asked when I showed her the check. I thought for a moment. Something good, something that matters. The answer came to me that weekend as my wife and I took our baby daughter for a walk down Justice Way. She was just learning to toddle, her small hand gripping my finger as she navigated the sidewalk with determined concentration. My wife walked beside us, smiling at our daughter's serious expression as she conquered each step. We paused at the corner of my driveway, the exact spot where Sheriff Sheila had first stepped from her cruiser that morning. The memory had lost its sting. Now it felt distant, like a story someone else had told me. "This spot needs something," I said suddenly. "Something to mark what happened here." The bench was installed 3 weeks later, a simple wooden structure anchored securely at the edge of my property, facing the street. The plaque, small but unmistakable, read, "Still free, still home." Neighbors stopped to admire it. Some sat for a moment, nodding in understanding at the message. Others simply touched the words as they passed, a silent acknowledgement of what we had all endured and overcome. Interim Sheriff Grant, now permanently appointed to the position, visited one evening as I was watering the newly planted flowers around the bench. "That is quite a statement," he said, gesturing to the plaque. "It is the truth," I replied. "That is all it needs to be." He nodded thoughtfully. "I have been reviewing the department records. The pattern goes back years. So many people just paid the fines and tried to stay out of her way. Fear is a powerful force, I said. So is courage, he countered. What you did, standing your ground when it would have been easier to back down, that changed things for everyone here. I shook my head. I just refused to be bullied in my own driveway. Sometimes that is all it takes, one person who will not be moved. After he left, I sat on the bench as evening settled over Justice Way. Lights came on in houses. Children were called in for dinner. A neighbor walked his dog, waving as he passed. Normal life, the precious ordinary, had returned to our street. My daughter's bedroom window faced the street. From the bench, I could see her nightlight glowing softly behind the curtains. She would grow up here on Justice Way. She would never know the fear that had once permeated these homes. She would never understand what it meant to dread the sight of a patrol car turning onto your street. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all, that the next generation would take for granted the freedom we had fought to reclaim. I ran my fingers over the plaque one more time before heading inside. Still free, still home. 4 simple words that had cost so much and meant everything. The notice about the county auction appeared in my email on a Wednesday morning. Public land auction, excess municipal properties, the subject line read. I nearly deleted it as spam before noticing that one of the listed parcels was located on Justice Way. Curious, I clicked through to the details. The county was selling a 30-foot strip of unused frontage that ran adjacent to several properties on our street, including mine. It was technically public land, but had never been developed. Just a grassy border between private property and the actual road. I called the county assessor's office immediately. Yes, that parcel is being liquidated as part of the budget restructuring, the clerk explained. It is considered non-essential municipal property. What happens to it if someone purchases it? I asked. It becomes private property, subject to existing easements and right-of-way restrictions. The owner can landscape it, fence portions of it according to code, or simply maintain it as open space. An idea began to form, not about revenge or justice, but about transformation. About taking something that had been used against us and turning it into something that would bring us together. The auction was held 2 weeks later in the county administrative building. I arrived early, bitter number clutched in my hand, heart pounding with unexpected nervousness. Several developers were present, eyeing the more valuable commercial lots. But when parcel 147, our strip of street frontage, came up, only 2 other bidders showed interest. The starting bid was $5,000. I raised my card immediately. One developer countered. I went higher. He shook his head and dropped out. The third bidder, a land speculator from the next county, hung on until $12,000 before conceding. Sold for $12,000 to bidder number 43, the auctioneer announced. Just like that, I owned the land that bordered the street where Sheila had once patrolled. The very ground she had stood on while writing those first citations. The irony was not lost on me. The title transfer was completed the following month. My property line now extended to include that strip of frontage. Legally, officially, and without fanfare, a piece of Justice Way now belonged to me. I had plans for that land, not walls or fences, but something open and welcoming. Using the restitution money and adding savings of my own, I transformed the strip into a neighborhood gathering space. Flowering trees were planted along the borders. Benches similar to the one in my driveway were installed at intervals. A small playground took shape at the widest section, with swings and a climbing structure painted in bright colors. 3 months after the auction, we held a street celebration to inaugurate the new space. Neighbors brought food to share. Someone set up speakers for music. Children raced between the playground and the ice cream truck that had been hired for the occasion. The new sheriff arrived midway through the celebration. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands and chatting easily with residents who no longer tensed at the sight of a uniform. He found me near the grill, where I was turning hamburgers. "This is quite a transformation," he said, gesturing to the gathering. "And I am not just talking about the landscaping." I smiled. Community is stronger than fear. We just had to remember that. You did more than remember it, he replied. You proved it. He extended his hand. Thank you for not backing down. You helped change this place for the better. As the sheriff moved on to greet other residents, I looked around at what our street had become. Children played freely where patrol cars had once lingered menacingly. Neighbors chatted across property lines that had previously marked boundaries of suspicion. The very air seemed lighter, cleaner, filled with laughter instead of whispers. Later, as twilight softened the edges of the day, I walked the length of our street, from my driveway where it all began, along the frontage that now bore my name on the deed, past homes where lights glowed with welcome. My neighbors called greetings. Someone raised a glass in my direction. A child raced past on a bicycle, carefree and unafraid. I had once stood in my driveway, accused of speeding on my own property. Now I stood as the man who had helped rewrite our community's story. The street was not just pavement and property lines anymore. It was living proof that injustice, no matter how entrenched, could be overcome. That fear, no matter how deep, could be replaced with connection. Justice Way, we had named it as an act of defiance. Now we lived it as a simple truth.